in the chat. Do you see it? Yeah. So Kylie's going to put a link to Susie's schedule in the chat, and just click that link, select free 30-minute coaching session, and find a time that works for you. And you can set that up with Susie. We'd love to do that with you. So click that link, schedule a free 30-minute session. I also want to let you know that throughout this whole webinar, we want to hear from you. Feel free to submit questions all throughout the webinar. This is a live webinar where we can all learn from each other. So ask as many questions as you want. Drew will make sure that all of your questions get answered. Either he'll respond via text or we'll answer them live. Now, there is a box, a special place to put questions, and for him to respond to answers. It's called Q&A down at the bottom. So please use Q&A for all of your questions from here on out. Ask really hard questions. Drew loves to answer hard questions. And even more than that, Kylie and I like to answer hard questions. So just, ask away whatever you need from this webinar time. Let's see. I think the other thing we're going to do is be asking a few poll questions. So just respond to that. I'm not even sure you have a choice. It'll just pop up and we'll have a poll question. So our team has spent more than 20,000 hours coaching ministry leaders and missionaries. And most of them say, I need more donors. But in reality, we find that many times they need to be doing the right things with the donors they have. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let's dig in. Kylie, you want to take us away?
Sure. Good to have everybody with us today. So the first strategy that we're going to be talking about today is about getting the second gift. So you can implement this strategy to get a second gift from a first-time donor. And we're not talking about somebody who has already committed to monthly pledges or something. We're really talking about somebody who may have just given a one-time gift, or you're not expecting them to give again necessarily. It's really, really important that we have an intentional process for responding to that first gift and then moving that donor into a second gift. It's really, really critical that we work through that. So that's the first strategy we're going to be going through. I think Russell's going to throw up a poll question. How do you usually respond to a first-time gift? I thank them personally, either by phone or in writing. Maybe you send a standard new donor communication. Maybe they just begin receiving your regular communication, or you're not sure. So you guys can go ahead and click on that poll question. I'll give you some time to do that so we can see the results here in just a second. How do you usually respond to a first-time gift? Russell, I'll let you handle the timing on when you want to.
Actually, almost everyone has answered. I'll give just a couple more seconds.
Wonderful.
I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. In poll, share results. So
all right. So an overwhelming number
Good
of
for you.
And personally, yeah, that's wonderful.
Good for you.
The next highest number was just they begin receiving regular communication. 8% of us just send a standard new donor communication, which is good. And then some of us are just not sure. So yeah, good information. It's nice to know that you guys, the majority of us, respond personally. So someone who has given a gift before is really already communicating that they have a high level of interest in your ministry. And we want to take advantage of this. Studies have shown time and time again that the earlier that you acquire a second gift, acquire a second gift, the higher the total giving of the donor will be over the lifetime of their relationship. So it's really important to try to go ahead and move a donor into that second gift. How do you get a second gift? Well, the first thing you want to do is to handle their first gift well. Several ways that you can do this. Just like a lot of you responded, we want to personally thank the donor, ideally within 48 hours. And timing is really important here. May not always be possible, but if possible, we want to thank them personally within 48 hours. Studies have shown that when you thank a donor within 48 hours of their gift, they're 4 times more likely to give a second gift. So a huge increase in the likelihood that that partnership is going to get off to a good a good start. Not only that, but studies have also shown that they're likely to give up to 50% more than their first gift. So that personal, relatively quick personal thank you is really, really important. So some ways that you can personally thank a first-time donor, phone call, even video call if you have that access to them, are good. Personal emails are good. Text messages are even appropriate, again, if you have that contact information, and that's a normal way of communicating for the donor. Maybe a handwritten note is another way that you can communicate with them that just shows the intention that you're putting into the relationship. But you want a personal way of thanking them, again, ideally within 48 hours. So during this first interaction with a donor, in addition to thanking them, you want to inform them about why their donation matters. So this is really getting into connecting their gift with impact. So some ways that you can do this are to share a story of maybe someone whose life has been changed because of your work. Maybe tell them 2 or 3 ways that you minister to people, or maybe remind them why giving now was so important. So you want to inform them along with thanking them about why their giving matters or why it made a difference. All right. The third thing you can do is to help them or to understand why they gave the gift and what they're passionate about. And this is a little bit of maybe research on your part. But you can easily find this out just by asking good questions. You want to be as interested in them as you would like for them to be in you and your ministry. So ask them how they learned about the ministry. Maybe ask them, what is it about this that motivated them to give? And you really want to understand what it is that they're connecting with and why they gave. The last thing is just build a personal connection. Kind of alluded to this earlier, but ask them if there's anything that they can be praying about, that you can be praying about with them. Maybe ask them a little bit more about their family or their work. So the goal of handling this first gift well is just to build trust and to share ownership. So then that we've handled the first gift well, the next step is to ask for a second gift.
Hey, Kylie, speaking of the second gift, we have a great question from Rick. He asked, how long after the initial gift should you be thinking about the second gift?
Yeah, good question. We were just about to get into that. A couple of things you want to know or ask yourself to prepare for the second ask. When is the right time to ask? You definitely want to thank them first, so not before you have thanked them for their initial gift. But usually you want this to be within 60 days of their first gift. And I know that may be a lot earlier than maybe many of you would think. But again, the point here is to sort of get the relationship off to a good start. And usually that means that you're going to do things a little bit quicker than otherwise you would when you've established a relationship with them. So usually within 60 days, you've thanked them within 48 hours. You've had some level of communication with them to understand how they're giving, why they're giving, what connected them with your ministry, understand a little bit about them. And then you want to follow up within a couple of months and invite them to partner with you again for something specific.
So Kylie,
Yep.
Couple of questions. One, 60 days might seem really short to some people. Like, oh my goodness, they just gave 2 months ago.
Sure.
So what am I going to be asking for? What kind of gift am I going to be asking for? And what about major donors? I mean, like, what if somebody, their first time gift is a major gift? Do I ask for another gift 60 days later?
Sure. Yeah, good questions. So in terms of what are you going to be asking for, part of that is the reason why you want to investigate their passions, what connected them, because you want to bring that back around to what they're going to partner with you long term.
Okay.
So, if they told you there was a specific thing that they learned that you were doing, or any kind of handle or connection point, then that's a good thing to bring back up when you're inviting them with the second gift. The main thing in terms of the invitation is just around impact. So if you can connect this to something they're interested in, then that's terrific. But you want to really, really help them understand how their giving is making a difference, especially with that second gift.
Okay.
In terms of major donors, I think that's a good question, I would say that if you didn't intentionally cultivate the first gift, then I would probably do a little bit more relationship building. If it was a significant gift, say $1,000 or more, and you didn't cultivate it, then obviously that person's invested, they have capacity. I would maybe spend a little bit more time really trying to get to know them and why they gave and what they're passionate about. But I still think that asking them for a second gift or some kind of long-term partnership fairly soon after it is still totally acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I guess capacity comes into play here when you're talking about major giving. You know, if somebody gave $1,000 gift and you end up finding out that that's almost to their capacity for giving,
Sure.
then you wouldn't be asking for another $1,000 in 60 days.
Yep.
But if somebody gave $1,000 and their capacity seems to be more like $25,000 to $50,000, then you may invite them 2 months, 3 months, 6 months later after cultivating the gift for $5,000, $10,000 gift, or maybe even something higher, depending on how you've been cultivating the relationship. So I totally agree.
So I've got another question for you from Paul Johnson. For either of you, what do you do when a person's committed to wanting to give a once a year gift? Like they want to give just annually once a year. How do you handle inviting them to give a second gift?
Yeah, that's great.
That is a great question. And that's one of the last things that I was going to mention in terms of the second gift is timing. Does the second gift need to be for a monthly gift or an annual gift? And really, to answer the question specifically, you want to let the relationship drive the partnership. So if the donor has indicated that they would like to give annually, then that's the rhythm and the timing that you need to sort of lead and direct the relationship. So absolutely, if they've indicated that they'd like to give, maybe it's the fourth quarter every year, then I wouldn't ask them for a second gift if you're clear that that's the rhythm that they want to be in.
Yeah, and Kylie, I'll actually share a step-by-step guide how to ask for the second gift at the end, towards the end of the webinar.
Yeah, I think the main thing is really to lead the relationship, but keep the relationship in mind. You don't want it to stall. You never want to be waiting on the donor to take the next step. But again, the relationship is the most important thing there. So, it really is important to get to know the donor, ask them about why they connected and what they're passionate about and what you can pray for them around. All of that stuff is very, very important to just continuing a good partnership in a relationship.
And if they're a first-time giver, Russell, you mentioned learning what their capacity is. You said if they give a $1,000 gift, but their capacity is, $50,000. How would some people want to know how, or Pam wanted to know, how would you go about finding their capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about major donors later on, but there are a couple of ways. One is wealth screening. Tailored actually partners with another organization to take a look at public data with of your contacts that tells us the capacity and inclination of that person. But if maybe you don't have that many people to screen, it may be worth just asking yourself the question, what do I think would be a generous amount for this person to consider? That open question, asking it to yourself about a specific individual, will allow kind of the natural things that you know about this donor already to help you answer that question.
Yep, and we'll get to more of those tips, I think, on our third key piece. So just to kind of wrap up this first strategy, getting the second gift is really key. You want to treat them well after the first gift to learn about them, and then lead the relationship intentionally into the second gift.
Yeah. So the next way that we might get more funding without adding more donors is by inviting those who give monthly to consider increasing their monthly giving amount. I want to launch another poll here. It says, what would you estimate is your average amount coming from monthly donors, not one-time donors, but monthly donors? Is it less than 50 per month, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, 100 to 125, or more than 125? This is always an interesting question to be asking with with so many people on the call, what is our average monthly gift amount? I'm just going to wait a few more seconds, about 5 more seconds. We're waiting on about 20 more people to respond in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. Last time the results didn't share properly, so hopefully they do. Less than $50 per month, about 13% of you. Majority, 42% of you believe your average monthly gift is $50 to $75 per month. And then $75 to $100 per month, about 25% of you said that's your average. And then $100 to $125 per month, 12% of you said that was your average. And then more than $125, 9% of you said that was your average. We find at Tailored when we're coaching somebody that it's not unusual to have an average over $100 per month when you work with one of our coaches. So I think that I would take advantage of that free coaching call if you're averaging less than $100 per month, or you want to even grow more past that. But let me share a little bit more about monthly giving and how to increase monthly giving here. It's easy to overlook current partners and say, I can't ask them to do more. But actually, if anyone is dedicated to seeing your ministry succeed, it's those who've been giving regularly for a long time. The reason we usually think to ask partners to increase is because our expenses have gone up, right? Or giving has decreased. But those may not be the reasons that would motivate donors to give. So what does motivate monthly donors? Specifically, what would their increased giving do for the ministry? And there are 2 motivations we want you to consider. There is certainly more, but here are 2 that are good to consider. First is sustainability. The world changes, economies get stronger or weaker, families grow, traveling might become more necessary, more expensive. As the world changes, our ministries change as well. So just because we've been working hard to solve a particular problem or meet a particular need for the people we minister to, it doesn't mean that those problems or needs have go away. They may have actually grown or become more challenging, and we may need more resources to meet those increasing challenges that we're facing. And a monthly donor may be motivated to increase their giving so the ministry can simply continue to see lives transformed in face of those challenges. So it's really about sustainability. The second motivation could be growth. A lot of partners tend to think about your ministry the way it was when they started partnering with you. And as a ministry continues, rather than becoming obsolete, it tends to become more complex. You might be expanding into new areas, starting new programs, oftentimes requiring more resources, like you may need to rent space, add staff. You might be needing more literature to hand out. You might need to be building more technology. You might say something like, for example, here are the key things this ministry is adding this year, so that way we can see this happen in people's lives. And we're looking for additional funding to see that happen. Something that actually could make this process a little easier, albeit maybe a little scarier, is getting monthly donors into an annual rhythm and not leave commitments open-ended. This way, when their commitment is about to end, you can thank them and ask them to continue supporting the ministry, which is a great opportunity to ask them to increase their commitment. Kylie and I were talking about this yesterday, and he said, this is kind of like marriage. You don't get married and never celebrate your anniversary. You always celebrate your anniversary. And that's similar to what this relationship with a monthly donor might be like. We want to celebrate that they've been partnering with us in this ministry another year. What a fantastic accomplishment we've done together. So let's celebrate it. I might say something like this, for example, this year we're going to disciple X number of people, or hold this many English classes, or feed this many kids or families, and to continue to make this ministry sustainable, I'm inviting a few key donors to increase their giving to make this happen this year. So just really simply, I always say honest, genuine, sincere with the donor. So think about increasing monthly giving, and think about, am I going to be inviting people around maybe potentially sustainability or growth?
Yeah, good point. All right, so we've covered a couple of strategies. The third one we wanted to share with you guys is about asking for major gifts. This is probably sort of the biggest bang for your buck, the most efficient return on an investment of time and energy in getting more funding without adding more donors. We're going to take a poll question in a second, but I don't know how many of you have thought about asking for major gifts, or maybe for some reason your ministry isn't structured well to invite major gifts. But so often this is an untapped resource. There are people who have been faithfully giving and really want a partnership with your ministry, who have a higher capacity, and maybe we've just never invited them to give sacrificially at that capacity. Another thing is, if you're raising more than $30,000 to $40,000 a year, then we highly recommend that you have some level of major giving. Once you reach a budget of around there, it really is necessary to have some higher capacity relationships in your partnership base. So the first question we usually get is, okay, well, what is a major donor? How much are we talking here? Well, this varies, but a good rule of thumb is, in general, this is someone who has the capacity to give a single gift of $1,000 or more. That's a good rule of thumb for major donors. Many times, higher capacity donors, they give out of assets and not just their monthly cash flow. So that's something to keep in mind. The relationship in the giving might be structured a little different from your average donor. Many times, major donors, they want to give quarterly or even annually because of that giving out of asset. So it's maybe a rhythm that is something they're a little more used to. Another thing is, asking for major gifts really needs to be closely linked with impact. So a lot of times, some of us may be used to communicating with donors about needs, or about how close we are to reaching our budget or fundraising goals. It's more about the fundraising process and hitting a financial goal. But when we ask for larger gifts, we really need to link that giving with impact, and clearly explain, this is the benefit, this is the impact that your investment in this ministry is going to have. So you want to ask for major gifts around those areas of impact. All right, so let's take a poll question. This one's going to ask, how long has it been since you've reviewed your list of current donors to see who might be capable of a major gift? So when's the last time you just combed through and thought about, is there anybody that I haven't been asking maybe their capacity? Have you done that in the last month? Maybe in the last 6 months? Some point in the last year? Maybe it's been more than a year, or I can't remember, honestly.
Kylie, while people are voting, I'm not sure we actually cover this in this section of the webinar, but speaking of major donors, research has shown that to reach 100% of the goal of a campaign, whether that's $500,000 or $1 million or $100 million, research has shown that if you don't get to 50% of your goal within the first 10 to 12 gifts, then you probably won't reach 100%. I know we have a mix of people on this webinar. Some are executive directors and fundraising professionals. Some of them are missionaries. I think for missionary budgets, that's a whole different beast. But for organizations, nonprofit ministries, it's something to consider. That's why major donors can be so important, because research has shown that if you don't reach 50% of a campaign within 10 to 12 gifts, you probably aren't going to reach 100%, which is really astounding.
Yeah, good point. All right. So the results of that, the majority of us just really aren't sure. Maybe it's been a while since we've combed through that. Pretty evenly spread over the other categories. In the last 6 months was the highest at 24%, or the next highest. So yeah, good information there. A good practice to always do. I would say at least every 6 months. It's a good rhythm just to sit down, and it takes 30 minutes or less, and just look through your list of donors and think about maybe what your plan is for each of those relationships. All right, the next question we usually get is, how do we identify major donors? I know this maybe came up earlier. And there's a couple of pointers here. Again, the overall rule is to let the relationship really drive things. But the first place to look is just with giving history. Like we just talked about, sort of combing through your list of past donors. It's a good signal that somebody could have a higher capacity if they've given at least a single gift of $500 in the past. So that's a good signal. Most of the time, our average donors, again, are giving monthly out of cash flow, or at least regularly out of cash flow. So when we find somebody that actually gives an above average single gift, that could indicate that they might have a higher capacity, and they might be a good potential donor to investigate a little bit more, develop the relationship with. Another option for identifying major donors, I think that a lot of us don't really utilize a lot, is to actually maybe find a close friend who knows your network, and just ask them to think through your network with you and help identify some maybe higher capacity partners.
Mm-hmm.
A great example of this is maybe a current major donor. People who are investing in your ministry at that level, they want you to be successful. They've taken ownership of this. And many of them would love to sit down and actually help you be even more successful in trying to identify other people that might have the capacity and the inclination to partner with you. So
that's great. Kylie, just to interrupt real quick, I think
Sure.
a great question that you might ask another major donor might be, you've been so generous over the past year, and we've seen God do some really amazing things through this ministry. And I'd love to look for more people, maybe in my network or your network, that have the ability to give a gift of $1,000 or more.
Yeah.
Who comes to mind?
Yeah.
When I say that, a nice open question. Who comes to mind? Not does anyone come to mind, because that's a yes or no question, but who comes to mind?
Is that what I asked?
It's just the coaching coming out of me.
Yeah, no, and that's a great surrogate strategy to try to maybe build off their network. But at the same time, especially if they're familiar with your network as well, just ask them to help you think through people that they probably know who have that capacity. So yeah, totally agree there, Russell.
Hey, I want to interrupt real quick. I got a couple questions, and I think they're all really good. So first, for Russell, Megan asked that statistic you gave us about reaching 50% in the first 10 to 12 donations. Does that include raising funds for long-term missions?
No, it does not. That whole scenario looks different. This is mainly around campaigns. We do find research that shows some fundraising professionals believe that even an organization in their annual fund having 50% of their giving coming from major donors is healthy, but that's kind of a debatable point.
Great.
So I do think, though, I would add to Megan's question, the principle behind that statistic is that you need to have a complete plan in place before you begin executing.
That's a good point.
Just like if you were doing an expense budget, your household budget, or building a building or a business, you're not just going to jump in and start spending things and see how your cash flow does. You're going to look at it and say, okay, roughly I have this much to spend on that and this much to spend on that. So the principle behind this is the same thing in fundraising. If you sit down and say, okay, I need to raise $6,000 a month over the next year, it's a really good strategy to try to get those big rocks in place first, so that you really know what you have to do with your average donors.
That's great. And then I have two questions that go actually really well together from Stan and Deidre. I'm probably just really butchered that, so I'm so sorry. Uh, Stan said we had a major donor. It's like $28.50 monthly. He gives for 3 to 4 years and then transitions to other ministries.
Mm.
And they want to know, how do you manage that type of donor and not end up significantly underfunded when they discontinue their support?
Mm.
And so off of that also, Deidre, man, is this asked if this was also applicable to major donors like in the other question.
Like monthly major donors.
Correct.
Yeah. Stan, I think that my recommendation is just planning. With this particular major donor, this is, I would say in our experience, this is not typical of major donors. It is kind of typical of foundations, that they will stick with you for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it just has to do with planning. If this is a strategy that the Lord has laid on this donor's heart, we want to honor that. They are the steward of the resources God has given them. So I think we just need to plan. So if we know that we're going to have this major giving monthly for the next 3 years, then let's just plan accordingly. And for Deidre, do these principles apply to monthly major donors? I think many of them do. You could even say if you have a major donor who's giving monthly, the potential actually for them to even give a one-time gift outside of their monthly giving is very high. So that could apply here as well. Kylie, do you have anything you would add?
Yeah, I have said this before, and I hope you guys will hear it many, many, many times with us, because this is the principle. It's all about relationship. So the best way to not get in those situations, and they do happen, as Russell has mentioned, is to really stay in tune with the donor. Make sure that you're over communicating how their giving has made a difference, learning about them personally. Usually when you're doing that well, then even if they do have to transition their giving to something else for whatever reason, it doesn't catch you by as much surprise. But again, it really is about donors aren't your customers. They're your shareholders. So certainly don't think of it as transactional, but think of it as they are owning this with you. And in some ways you have a responsibility to steward your leadership in this co-ownership of the ministry. So it's all about relationship. It's all about communicating, not just when they give or in order to get them to give. The last point about major donors, and then Russell, we'll get onto that fourth strategy, is to think beyond individuals. And this has already come up in some of the questions in our conversations. Churches, businesses, even though it's a little bit of a different strategy for individuals fundraising, but even foundations, those can be considered major donors because of the capacity that they have. The strategies for those are very, very similar to individuals or families that are giving high capacity gifts. And that is that you want to identify the decision maker, but at that point, really treat them as an individual. Treat them where the relationship is driving everything, just like you would an individual. So with a church, a lot of times with institutional giving, there's more of a structured process. With foundations, there's even paperwork and applications and all that kind of stuff. So timing is important in terms of annual budgets and things like that. There's certainly an individual or a smaller group that are probably ultimately making that decision. But still treating those individuals as individuals, letting the relationship drive things. There's a lot of opportunities with businesses and local churches to receive significant gifts.
Yeah. I want to answer just one question from Eric and Veronica, Drew, if that's okay. What strategy would you recommend to reach more individuals? There's a strategy we usually, this webinar is about how to get more funding without adding more donors. But if you want to add more donors, I think a great strategy is an advocacy strategy. It's a little different than referrals. It's actually empowering others to tell the story of your ministry and connect you and want to connect you to people in their network, I would actually really encourage you to sign up for that free 30-minute coaching session with Susie. And you can definitely make that the focus of your coaching session. I think that'd be really, really fantastic. The last thing I want to give you as a way to get more funding without adding more donors is a simple roadmap for how you keep donors giving again and again. I want to ask, let's do one last poll question. Let me launch this. How often do you communicate in any way with your donors? Multiple times a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year? How often do you communicate in any way with your donors? Once, multiple times a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year. We find that communication is the thing that connects donors to impact. Messaging is so important. So communicating is key. I'm going to end this poll in 3, 2, 1. I love those last minute answers. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Hopefully it shares properly. Multiple times a week, only 3% of you do that. Once a week, 8% of you do that. Once a month, majority, 53%. Once a quarter, 36%. And then once a year, 0%. So everyone's communicating more than once a year. So that's a plus for sure. So let's talk about a communication cycle. I'd like to give you a step-by-step roadmap on how to keep your donors giving time after time. This is especially helpful for major donors, but really helpful for any donor. And we call it a communication cycle. So at first you see that what we want to do is build the relationship and identify passions. The most important thing about a gift is the person who gave the gift or will give a gift. Partnership is always about the relationship. So don't neglect the person and their interests. So when you're talking with them, you want to dig deep into those interests, what they're passionate about. Those are from God. They're given from God, and those passions are from Him. And I find that sometimes when I'm talking with donors about their interests, when I dig deeper and deeper and ask more questions, they begin to discover what they're actually passionate about, even more than when they first started. So I love that. The second thing you're going to do is identify a problem that you can solve together. We're not in ministry because everything's hunky-dory and it's all worked out and it's all finished. We're in ministry because there are some real problems in the world, and we are looking to solve those problems. So that's the same reason your donor is going to want to give again and again, or even for the first time. At Tailored, we like to say the hero is only as great as the villain is bad. That means if your problem is not that important, it's not worth solving, then the solution of your ministry isn't going to be that great. But if the problem you're solving is so urgent, you're going to have donors saying, what are we going to do about this? How do we get more people involved? So the problem is, and communicating that is so important. What problem are we solving together? Next, offering a solution to the problem. What are we going to do together? This is so important, the word together, in talking about the solution, because partnership is about what we're accomplishing together with God. So you don't say, hey, here's the solution I'm going to do. Will you give me funding to go do that? It's, hey, here's the solution we can do together, because we all play an integral part. Like Kylie said earlier, these are shareholders, not customers. The next thing is make the ask. Be specific and tie it directly to impact. If you haven't already downloaded the book, How to Get a Generous Response Almost Every Time You Ask, Kylie, if you could put that in the chat at generous.tailoredfundraising.com. In that book, I cover 5 asks that allow for an honest response. And that's what's so important. You want to communicate in a way that people can respond honestly. So this book, it's a short 25, 30 pages. It actually tells you how to onboard a new donor, but so valuable. What are 5 asks that allow for a genuine, honest response? How can you communicate that clearly? Next, make it easy for them to partner with you. Don't leave it up to them to figure it out. Even asking them, what's the best way for you to give? Would you like me to give you an envelope so you can mail a check in? Should I text you a link? There are a few ways they might be able to give. Just identify which one's going to work for them and then give it to them. And you may have to give it to them several times before they actually follow through, which is okay. Next, you're going to move out into that loop on the right-hand side. And the first circle, it says YMAD. That stands for You Made a Difference. Like I said, partnership is about what we're accomplishing together with God. And we want to communicate to these shareholders, to these partners, how their giving is making a difference. This is about impact. This is about stories of people's lives being changed. We say that impact is the difference being made in the difference the gospel is making in people's lives, both big and small ways. So how is their giving making a difference? You want to communicate that. The next touch point you want to communicate, or the next thing you want to communicate is just a personal touch point. Get to know them as a person. I give this example of, I'll give Drew as an example. Drew and I aren't friends simply because I want to get more out of him in our working relationship. So I'm just going to be his friend. So that way, when I need some help, he'll give it to me. No, Drew and I are on the same team at Tailored, and our friendship is important to us working together and making a difference together. And so I invest in that friendship. Not because I want more out of it, but I know it's for the good of us working together and doing what God's called us to do together. Mm-hmm. That's the same thing in this touch point. And you're actually you stay on the outside of that loop with the you made a difference and then a personal connection, then a you made a difference, then a personal connection. And you keep going back and forth until you're ready to come back out of that loop and identify another problem that we can solve together. Maybe that's because we're asking for another major gift. Maybe that's because we're asking them to increase their giving. Maybe we're just asking them to give again. But after you come out of the left side of this diagram, you go into that loop and you stay in that loop, alternating communications, specifically with major donors, until you come outside that loop. For major donors, as a rule of thumb, I like to go 1 month of a you made a difference, 1 month of personal connection, 1 month you made a difference, 1 month of personal connection. However, every person is different. And so you're going to have maybe it's less frequent, maybe it's more frequent per person. Maybe you're in this cycle where, a lot of you communicate once a month. Maybe 1 month you're sending an email that is how your donors are making a difference. Maybe the next month you're sending personal emails to donors and asking how you can pray for them and ask them how their family's doing and things like that. So this is a fantastic communication cycle diagram. Like I said, we're going to be actually sending you a link next week to a PDF that actually has this diagram in it. And it has all of the content from this webinar and even more laid out so you can actually kind of review it, use it. We want to make this super, super helpful for you. By following this cycle, you will keep more of the donors you have. And we all know that keeping the donors we have is much easier than finding new ones. So we have those 4 strategies that we've covered today: getting the second gift, increasing monthly giving, identifying, asking potential major donors, and then keeping the donors you have, including this step-by-step guide on how to do that. Drew, I want to answer some questions if we have any, but first I just want to remind people of what I said earlier at the very beginning. If you weren't happy with the results of your fundraising in 2017, or maybe you'd just like to see different results in 2018, but you don't really know what steps to take, I would really encourage you to connect with a tailored coach. We're actually giving away a free 30-minute coaching session with one of our coaches, Susie. And all you need to do is click the link that I'm putting in the chat right now. That's Susie's calendar. And you just click free coaching session and then find a time that works for you. And she will coach you for 30 minutes around a topic that's going to help you excel in 2018. So I would go ahead and just click that, find a time. It's totally worth it. Drew, do we have any questions that we can answer?
Oh, do we have questions? We have plenty of questions, Russell. Here we go. So Pam, so the You Made a Difference is different from the newsletter, which gives stories on how and how answers this question.
Yeah, so really it shouldn't be different than the newsletter. Your newsletter should be about how we're making a difference together. It could include other things. Sometimes you have it's a newsletter that's very personal to you. And you might share some things that are happening within your family. You might ask people to pray for specific things that are going on within your family, not just your ministry. But in general, your newsletter should be how we're making a difference together, or what problem are we solving together? Or what's that new exciting thing that we're going to be doing next month together to see the gospel go even further. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to add a little bit to that. If there's nothing that says you can't go beyond and send personal emails to people either. You can send out your newsletter, and then if you have a major donor, type out a 5 to 10 minute personal email to them and say, hey, just want to check in on you and let you know what's been going on. That's great, Drew. Yeah. Yes, great. Thanks. So the next one's Debbie Taylor. What's the most effective way to communicate with donors, which kind of comes off of that last question? Face-to-face, email, newsletter. Yeah. I'll throw in there social media, right? All those kinds of things. What's some preferences and best practices? Well, there's different strategies to go with different donor segments. I will say that. But in general, in our experience, you want to communicate in a way that donors can respond honestly, especially when you're inviting them to give. And when I say respond honestly, if, for example, if I get something that's not personal, that's to the masses, and you're asking me to give, that's not bad, but it's not really inviting me to respond personally. And so I'm much less likely to respond because I know it's really not just to me. And so you're not necessarily looking for me to definitely answer that question. Would I give? But if I'm in a conversation on Zoom, on Skype, over the phone, I'm only talking to one person. So when I ask a question, they know that I'm asking them and it's not just for everybody. Communicating to the masses has its place because sometimes we can't communicate individually to every single person in our contact list or every single donor. And so sometimes a direct mail piece, maybe an email that is mail merged with their first name, things like this, things that I like emails that aren't over designed, that feel like a personal email. Things like this. Sometimes social media is great if you have one, cultivated that channel and that you have the right ask. It's super urgent and the impact is so clear. Those two things have to be super strong for a really good social media ask. Yeah, great. Thanks, Russell. Next, we've got Christopher Galt. Hopefully that was right. Do you see much impact from new tax law? If so, in what areas? So I'm going to let you handle this one. Yeah, Kylie, are you familiar with the new tax law, or just I'm slightly familiar?
Yeah,
there is debate on whether or not new tax law is going to hinder, because it has to do with itemizing or not itemizing. Drew, we can hear you typing. Thank you. Sorry, I meant to. It's okay. I think there's benefits now to more benefits to not itemize, which means it has to do with deductions, right? We're not tax experts, but that's the general gist. I think what this means, Chris, is that communicating how your giving is making a difference is even more important than ever. Do I think giving is going to go down? I think in some sectors it might go down. When I think about education, which is, Kylie, is education the biggest sector for giving or the second biggest? Religion's the first.
Yeah, religion's the largest.
Yeah, I'm not sure that giving in the religious sector would go down necessarily. But I will say that, again, impact, how our giving is making a difference, is the sure way that people will continue to give no matter the tax implications.
Yeah,
they're more likely to give no matter the tax implications.
Yeah, I would absolutely underscore that. Just as the general public starts thinking about their charitable giving and it's in the news and stuff, whether it's positive or negative or questionable or whatever, it's going to cause people to think and just maybe evaluate, and should I be doing this? Is there a better way to do it? It's always important to link it with impact, over communicate, develop the relationship. In general, about the tax law, I don't think that for most small to medium-sized nonprofits, certainly individuals, it's not going to have that big of a thing. I do think it's going to have implications for the larger nonprofit community, simply because so many of the dollars raised come from extremely high capacity donors. And, even though they're committed to what they're give to, so much of their decision is simply based on a financial reality. So it's possible that, rather than giving the $500,000 I usually give every year, I'm only going to give $350,000.
Right.
And when you add up all of those high capacity people, it could be a significant chunk of just total dollars given to charity. Again, I don't think it's going to have that much effect on small to medium sized nonprofits, though.
Yeah, but something you could do, a strategy you could take, is just having an honest conversation with your major donors, and just saying, hey, there's new tax law coming out. Do you see this affecting the way you give to this ministry or other ministries? I mean, they're a shareholder. You're doing this together. So we've been on for an hour, Kylie, and it's gone by so fast. And just want to thank everybody for being on here. Go ahead, take advantage of that free 30-minute coaching session. It will definitely affect the way you fundraise this next year. So if you haven't already, again, I'll be sending everybody a link to a PDF called Get More Funding Without Adding More Donors. And it's going to have all of this content in there, even a little bit more. So it's going to be way better than the notes we could send you. It's actually a little ebook. So I'm looking forward to sending that link to you next week. So make sure you download it.